today. Well, it claims we're live.
I don't feel like a zombie.
Not going there. Nope. Just go ahead.
If you enjoy snarky t-shirts, and in this crowd, you probably do, Among the Leaves Tees will have snarky t-shirts. I think he said his emphasis right now is STEM. So like physics, graphics, and stuff. Not my cup of tea, too much math.
Says the scientist.
Hey, this scientist hit calculus and bounced hard. King Harv's Imperial Coffees, which is exactly what you need if you have a calculus test coming up. He sells a lot of different varieties, so some of them probably more strong than others.
Hey, Richard.
And if you would like to keep the blanket fort cool, comfortable, and dry
The lights on.
inside, the lights on, the internet running, send us some money here, please. Tip jar. That's what that is. That is our tip jar, like one of those little things sitting next to the counter. Yes. A lot of the crew is on the road to Imaginarium.
Yep.
Some flying, driving, taking a shortcut with Rita. That should be an interesting story.
Riding camels.
So it's Jim and I and my husband in the peanut gallery.
Yeah.
We will happily take some of your rain, Brennan. Happily.
Yeah, math is interesting. It's even more interesting when it's all letters and no numbers.
Yeah. Well, if it's all numbers, then it's arithmetic and it's understandable.
Yeah.
If it's got all letters, it's math and nobody understands it. They just lie about it.
I can glimpse the elegance.
Yeah.
And when I got into calculus, some of the stuff, the concepts behind calculating curves and how you did that and everything and approaching zero was beautiful. It's elegant.
Yeah.
But I'm slow. And I could not take a 55-minute calculus exam and get a passing grade to save my life.
Yeah.
Because I was still working on like problem 1.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a good point, Jesse. And the devil said, put the alphabet in math.
Oh, no,
Yeah.
It's worse than that. You get to a certain point and we've gone beyond letters and numbers, and then they start to drag in strange arcane symbols.
Yes. A Bayesian architecture.
Yeah, I hit that in analytical chemistry where we had Greek symbols in our calculations and
Yeah.
stuff, and I was like, I know what some of this is because I actually studied Greek for another reason. But
Well, it's bad when you're sitting in a meeting and the PhD in math gets up and puts up a five slide long formula. And then goes, now this is the short version.
yeah, I couldn't do that because the minute the first slide went away, my brain would just wipe it clean. And then I'd be looking at the next slide going, I don't remember what came before this.
Yeah. And 40 minutes later, I got it walked out,
Mm-hmm.
went over, got a cup of coffee, had a cigarette, came back in. They were still arguing. So, let me see, is it lunchtime yet? Yeah. Nancy, since you're on here, I'm going to bring up what you said this morning. Nancy was talking about editors this morning
Yes.
on her Substack.
Which is, if you're looking for it, the Substack is cat on a keyboard.
Yeah. Might be self-explanatory.
Yes. We've all been there.
But from a writing side, yeah, where's the slide that says, and miracle happened? Now, that was the discussion afterwards. Editors can be your best friend or your worst enemy. They can save you or they can bury you. I just finished editing John Van Stry's 4th novel in his Wolfhound series.
War Child. I just finished doing the cover for that.
Yeah. But the only thing I was looking at was the Navy stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Not looking at anything else because that wasn't in my purview. it's a good story.
Yeah, he writes a good story.
He does write a good story.
But he
However,
was Air Force.
he's Air Force. Yeah. So a few things had to get fixed. But Cedar made the comment back on Nancy's this morning about getting stuck with werewolves.
Oh yes. Well, I had been invited to submit a story to a magazine by one editor, the senior editor of the magazine. And I was like, sure, I've got a story in a drawer here. I can send it out to you. Do you have any particular guidelines? And he's like, no, whatever you have.
Yeah.
Even he would have even taken nonfiction. He just wanted something from me.
Yeah.
So I had a story that I'd written that was extrapolated out from real life experiences that my dad had as a young surveyor on the islands off Southeast Alaska, and with wolves. So these are thinly fictional, and I send them off, and I get a note back from this editor, and I went and looked her up, and she had like just graduated high school. She was extremely young, very new to this job, probably an unpaid intern, and she wanted me to make the wolves into werewolves. And I was like, no, okay. And so I withdrew the story, and I never submitted to the magazine again because that was ridiculous.
Yeah.
And I was like, well, they obviously don't want what I sent them, and I'm not going to try it again because I'm not going to throw stuff at a wall to find out what sticks.
Yeah.
So yeah. So definitely not sexy werewolves.
Oh, Brennan. Richard, the library anthology is due the end of September. Yeah. Spot the Twilight Fanatic. Yeah.
I suppose it's possible. I don't remember the timeline exactly. It's been several years. 7 or 8 years probably since that happened. And and I've had other editors since then that wanted extensive changes to a story. And most of the time I'm just like, sure, whatever. I mean, if they're going to pay me,
yeah.
I don't have any problem with it. But that one would have broken the story. I mean, it was completely not right.
Yeah.
I have a question for you on the vampires and werewolves things, especially the sexy ones. If a werewolf and a vampire get in a fight, and the werewolf bites the vampire and the vampire bites the werewolf, do you get a bestial vampire or an undead werewolf?
I think you need to go back and reread like Monster Hunter International all the way through. John, I don't remember what I did with that story. I will look and let y'all know. It's probably out there somewhere, but I can't remember.
Yeah, at least you don't have Heinlein's juvenile editor interfering. Yeah.
Oh, wizard with dyslexia, wizard with dyscalculia, which is what I do, which is scramble the letters in my head. Or when I look from the whiteboard down to my paper to write them down, I forget them. Raptor points out that if the werewolf in question is Earl Harbinger, you hit one dead vampire.
Yeah.
Yes, but Earl Harbinger is an outlier.
Brennan, please tell me you're writing a story with a ghost moose in it.
Yeah. Oh.
With train horns coming out of his horn.
Yeah. No, just no.
No, there's no trains in Alaska.
Not many.
There are in Canada. And they have moose in Canada.
You get up far enough into Alaska, and very deep cold does weird things to metal, which you know. You've worked under those conditions.
Yes, but that's why I'm saying in Canada.
Yeah. Jesse says, more interesting is a vampire biting a fae. Vamp binds to the fae, but they also accept the food of the fae and are bound to the vamp. So basically they're married.
Oh, Jesse, if there isn't already some kind of fantasy romance, what are they calling that these days? Romantasy book with that theme, there will be in about 10 minutes.
Yeah.
With 7 sequels.
Yeah.
Yes, I actually know that there's the Alaska Railroad, but any place it gets really cold, you stop being able to do that, which is why it doesn't go any further than Fairbanks.
Yeah. Yeah, going back to the math, yes, Dawn, you're exactly right.
Mm-hmm.
Retain it long enough to do whatever you're going to do with it and then forget it.
Yep. Yep.
Because there's only so much room in our brains.
Yeah. And
Cut it down to a program that you could put in the computer and then put the numbers in when you need the answer.
We did that in 1974, 75 with the first HP calculators.
mm-hmm.
And we did it because we were responsible for about 3,000 pages of classified stuff,
Yeah.
a lot of which was formulas.
Mm-hmm.
And they were class specific formulas, depending on the submarines. And it was a hell of a lot to try to remember, to be quite honest.
Yeah.
That's why you put it all in the calculator or the computer, and you just plug the numbers in when you need answers.
Well, we had these little strips that were programmable. So we sat down and programmed the strips.
So it's like early memory.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then wrote the formula on the strip. So if you got out on station and you got brand X, oh, okay, Stunk. Yeah, that really is him. Okay.
Yeah.
I've done it for other parts of other things in electronics, because if I sat down and tried to start the calculations to do the frequency changes, then by the time I was finished, it would be too late to do the work.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Brennan, it's actually easy because you get to the point you do them all in your head. Of course, you've got to memorize by that point. But
right. You got to get to that point.
I'm saying that having been doing it for 60 years.
You don't remember the beginning. That's why it's hard when you're an expert at something to go back and teach the basics. There are people that can do it, but it's difficult because you get to the point where you've internalized it so much that you don't necessarily remember what that was like to get the basics down and work through what you needed to get to the point that you didn't have to think about it anymore.
Well, it's not that you don't think about it. It's just that you automatically do the calculations.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then you adjust, because at 1,000 yards, 172 grain bullet, it's going to drop 431 inches on a standard day, which is 59 degrees. And that's sea level, basically. Start raising the temperature, the drop decreases.
Yeah.
Start raising the altitude, the drop decreases.
So if you're really hot and really high,
you
get a really flat trajectory.
Well, no. 439 inches is not flat, my dear. It's
no. Well, okay.
But it brings that down quite a bit.
So I suppose more flatter would be the better word there.
It comes down to about 408 inches.
Yeah, that's not a lot of. Yeah, it's still a lot of arc.
But it takes, basically 31 inches out, so almost 3 feet out.
It is. It's a big adjustment.
Yeah. Actually, come down here in Texas. Right now, the longest shots are being made down here in Texas, brother. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
James,
exactly, James.
Yeah. Well, he says one of our best machine operators is also our worst trainer. He does too much by instinct.
Yeah.
No, I said, hi, hot snipers are flatterers.
Yeah, the old HP 41s. We were actually doing it with HP. Oh God, what was the number? Well, we got 67s. When we really went with it, Navy bought 67s and 97s. But that was a year or two ago.
Yeah, I was gonna say the only thing I know is that I remember my dad complaining about his first calculator, which he must have bought in 74, 75, cost like $300, and it didn't do as much as the one that we bought for like $12.99 when I was going into high school and needed a scientific calculator. 3D cell
batteries to run it.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was. I think that we didn't still have dads, but I can remember Dad just being like, the price had come down so much.
Yeah.
I had one of those. It took 3D cell batteries to run it.
Yeah.
Well, Brennan, just to give you an example, I zero my rifle here, which we're at about 1,200 feet. I go up to Colorado to shoot, and I'm taking 100 yards off of my range estimate just to get it down to the point where I'm accurate again. Have a good one, Ben. I do have a rant since we've wandered off into the weeds.
He has a rant. I have props.
Enough with the friggin' conspiracy theories already. Jesus. I have seen more shit in the last couple of days. I still do RPN, Rick. Yeah, 984. Fine, Brian. I'll take that. But, for God's sakes, folks, there are more questions than there are answers. And nobody knows all the answers yet. Nobody knows all the questions yet. So for God's sakes, give it a friggin' break. All these people are getting spun up for nothing. And I mean, they're going off on conspiracy theories that, you couldn't write something like that and make it believable, much less have it believable in fact. Incompetence, yeah, that's part of it. I know that, Dawn, but it's still, for God's sakes, give it a friggin' rest.
Humans are a storytelling creature. And when the story isn't finished, we seem to have this compulsion to try and make it make sense. And I realize that conspiracy theories are largely nonsensical, but they make sense to someone, and then why they get carried on from there is that they make sense to someone else because they're suddenly a coherent story instead of loose ends and questions. People don't like loose ends. People don't like questions. They want everything tied up in a bow
in 27 minutes.
Yeah, it's not going to happen.
I know it is not, and it's one of those things that it's part of human nature to do.
Yeah,
but it's also, it doesn't help, especially not now, not in this age of the internet, when a storyteller can have their theory go around the world and come back presented as truth.
Yeah.
So.
Well, and signal to noise ratio, like Brian said, is garbage.
Mm-hmm.
Larry makes a good point. Can God make a rock so big he or she can't move it? Who knows the answer?
He makes a rock that big, then he puts feathers and wings on it, and it moves itself.
Yeah.
Not that kind of rock.
Yeah.
John, I would not hold out hope for getting real info eventually. Unfortunately, there are too many people involved in this, and now I'm going to sound like a conspiracy theorist, who it's in their best interests not to make that easy to discover the truth.
Well,
redact reports and classify stuff.
Yeah.
And
well, the truth will be out there. The only thing about it is you can't tell which is the truth and which is which batch of disinformation.
That too.
Yeah. Rock of Ages. Thank you, Sarah. Incompetence is pretty much a given, just to be frank. But the thing is, the amount of BS that's out there, because everybody wants it right now, and you've got these internet experts coming out of the weeds that don't know jack, but they have got a voice. So they get to make pronouncements on TV, MSN, wherever.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's
honestly, the people that know what they're talking about aren't saying anything.
And it's these people that are using their voices. It's because it's their job.
Yeah.
That's their job to, they make a living this way. They get their power and their influence this way. And on the other side, you've got the government bureaucracy that's trying to cover stuff up because it's their jobs that they could potentially lose. if it comes out that they screwed up.
Yeah.
Um,
Well,
because
heads should be rolling over this.
yes, and they probably won't.
In my day, 20, 30 years ago, heads would be rolling already.
Mm-hmm.
Well, the thing about it is, heads are likely to roll, but it'll be somebody that had no real responsibility, no real say so
Yeah,
in
scapegoat.
it, and it'd just be a scapegoat.
Yep.
Mhm. Yep.
It's
Yep.
all the fault of Joe over here, who was
Yeah.
the guy that was in charge of buying peanuts.
Well, resourcing is always an issue. Anybody that deals with LEOs, security organizations, whatever you want to call them,
Mm-hmm.
there is always a dearth of resources.
Yeah.
That's just a fact.
Limited budgets.
Yeah.
Somebody had made a comment that there was only X number of policemen there from the local town, and I'm thinking, I wonder how many policemen that town actually had. What percentage of the policemen were there being supplied to help out with the security?
Probably 80% of the force was there.
Right, and that's exactly what I
Yeah.
was thinking. Is that, yeah, it looks like a small number to you, but if this was a relatively small town, I know most places I've lived that had small towns had small police forces.
Well, they're going to bring in the locals. They're going to bring in the county. They're going to bring in the state folks.
Mm-hmm.
They're going to bring in,
It's a really big event.
yeah,
And none of them know how to work with each other.
yeah, probably 200. I would guesstimate around 200 LEOs from various agencies. They should have common communications. However, apparently, in this case, they didn't.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not going to go into detail on that.
Yeah. Well,
But there are,
yeah.
I have worked with White House communications before, for real. And there are ways to do things because we got it done every time. Why it was not done this time, I don't know. I'm not there. I've been out of that business for a lot of years, so I'm not going to say. But one of the things that I got in a commentary back and forth the other night on was wind drift on a bullet. I shoot. I've shot for years. I have calculations to figure that stuff out.
Mm-hmm.
So I did a quick back of the envelope and actually ran it through one of my ballistics programs. And I came up with 1.2 to 1.8 inches at 130 yards. The amount of people that called BS on that was absolutely friggin' amazing.
Hmm.
Well, that's not right.
Why is it not right? Do you have your calculations? I mean, this is my thing.
And that's when I just dropped out of that conversation in its
Yeah.
entirety.
Yeah, I started to have an argument the other day with a guy that was going up one side and down the other about how America is a democracy, not a constitutional republic. And I'm like, whoa, hold up, wait a minute.
Yeah, what?
And he's like, it's right there in the dictionary. This is what the definition of democracy is, and that's what our government looks like. So therefore, we're democracy. And I'm like, okay, moving on.
Yeah.
But it's just, there are people that are invested in what the story is that they have in their head.
Yeah.
And it doesn't matter if it bears no resemblance to reality or even extrapolates from reality as we know it.
Yeah.
And it's,
Sir Brass, there are a number of other issues. What was he using? Was he open sights? Was he using, some kind of, scope or aim point, something like that? Most of the aim points out there, the dot on an aim point is 4 minutes of angle. So at 130 yards, that dot is 4 inches. That dot would have just about covered the head.
yeah.
And you're talking about somebody that's not trained, that's not used to doing snapshots.
Well, if he'd had any training, even hunting training, he would not have been shooting at the head.
Yeah. Well, and I'm not even going to get into that because
No.
that's a whole nother.
Right. But I'm thinking that when I was trained to hunt,
Yeah.
We were taught not to shoot at the head because it's harder to hit and you're much more likely to have a shot that's going to put your critter down. Because you don't want an injured animal running around through the woods.
No, you don't want to chase him.
No, you don't want to chase him, and you don't want your meat to taste bad when you finally track him down 5 miles later.
Yeah.
So how I was trained was different. So I'm like, this kid was obviously not a trained hunter. I mean, he wasn't a hunter.
No.
That's just plain
which is all to
sense.
the good, actually.
Right. No, absolutely.
Yeah.
We'd be having a whole different conversation several days ago had he been had any kind of real training. But I'm just saying that that's a kind of a common sense observation of kind of a, well, duh. Which is totally different than the whole conspiracy theory of he was a CIA plant and
Padre, no question, the head turn was the grace of God.
The one that gets me are the people that claim that the notching the ear from 150 yards away was intentional.
No. I mean, I am not a trained sharpshooter. I had training to be a hunter a long time ago, and I haven't even hunted in a decade.
Yeah.
But still.
Yeah, James, that's also a good point. And those are the pieces that we don't know. We'll never know.
Mm-hmm.
Because obviously he's not able to be questioned.
Right.
But this is why I'm saying people just need to step back, take a chill pill, and ignore 2/3 of the shit that's out there.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think right now it's more productive to look at the near future and go, okay, what can we do to make sure this doesn't happen again?
Yeah.
What can we do to make...
I did notice that every appearance that he's made since then have been with large men his size around him.
Yes.
Just as a interesting quick, what is the flight time for a 5.56 for 150 yards?
Well, oh God. Well, it's 2,900 feet per second, so not long.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm just saying, trying to do anything with a moving target.
Yeah.
Well, and that's the thing too, which is he was startled by the police officer sticking his head up over the edge.
Yeah.
Snapped off a bunch of shots and then was put down. And so we don't know what he might have done had he had the chance to go slow and steady and try to get a little bit more on target.
See, Sir Brass, you're sitting there throwing stones.
Mm-hmm.
Bullet weight, fine. 55 grain, 62 grain.
Yep.
They're roughly the same.
Yeah. And that's going to have a fractional difference at that yardage. And yes, the fractional differences are what matters to a sniper, but this kid was not a sniper.
Yeah.
So
it always depends.
It depends. Yeah. It depends. You can do a rough guess calculation on this kind of thing. But really it's fairly evident that he really didn't have a lot of training. And it's like, I don't even know that we'll ever know what his motivation really was.
No.
Because for all that I'm seeing people out there talking about the political stuff, he may just have been in it for notoriety.
Oh, yeah.
There are a lot of kids, and especially young men.
Copycats, yeah.
Well, it's not even copycats. There are a lot of kids out there right now, a lot of young men in particular, that they have no purpose and meaning in life. And so what we're seeing is an uptick in them trying to go out with a bang because that way they are at least notorious.
Yeah.
And I think that there's exemplars certainly in what's happened in the last decades with school shootings, but I also think that there's games and movies and stuff that espouse this kind of thing.
Well, a lot of the gaming.
Mm-hmm.
And the thing in the gaming is they all have a reset button.
Yeah.
Real life doesn't have a reset button.
No. And I think that absent purpose, meaning, a healthy community around them, that there are a lot of kids that are in danger.
Oh yeah.
There are probably a lot of young men who believe since they are not 6'6", don't make $150,000 in
Yeah.
a year. And,
Yeah, Brennan, I'm very aware of it. I have 4 kids that are not a lot younger than you are, and I see that even in them.
Yeah.
So, and it is very sad. It's a whole generation that is in trouble, and instead of doing things that might actually help them, the authorities seem to be going in the exact opposite direction and doing the stuff that is not going to help and is making it worse.
Yeah.
So
The other news that's coming out, starting to come out today, and I've heard from a couple of different sources, including one report apparently from Axios. They're now thinking that Biden is going to drop out this weekend.
yeah, I've been seeing some
Finally,
murmurs.
Enough
the
pressure
whole-
has been put on him.
Well, and the whole COVID thing being announced might have been a precursor to setting up excuses.
Well, yeah, and one wag said in response to the Axios report, COVID now, pneumonia later, oops.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah, that's,
again, with drifting into
yeah.
um
So you got another conspiracy theory there.
right. Well, and it's easy to do that too, because here's the thing, which is that there's a kernel of truth there. It's
Yeah.
We're extrapolating off of things we've seen happen before.
Yeah.
And
Flippin' Harmon, you must be from Missouri.
yeah, it will be interesting to see what happens in the states where the ballot deadlines are already passed, because I don't know. I'm sure that they have exceptions in there to allow another candidate, but I don't actually know that for a fact.
I don't either.
I know that there's
obviously you and I are not internet experts.
Right. And I usually avoid politics like the plague.
Yeah.
I mean, I it's not that I don't ever contemplate it. I just try not to.
In some states, they've already printed the ballots probably.
Yeah.
Probably.
And the old chance
well, that's how dead candidates have been elected before.
Yes.
The ballots were already printed.
Wally, I was joking. I don't know where Flippin' Harmon is.
Flippin' Harmon says Kansas.
Oh. Sorry. Missed by a state.
But I usually avoid talking about politics, partly because I don't know enough about it to really feel comfortable opining on it. There's some people that I read and trust, and oddly enough, one of them is not an American.
Yeah.
So,
I know who you're talking about.
Yeah. Under the olive tree. And the other one that I like to go and read her stuff is Professor Ornery.
Yeah.
And because, well, she has a really good turn of phrase, which is fun. But it's one of those things that occasionally you really have to think about it.
Yeah. Yeah, Don, you're right. Discussing politics is rarely a pleasant conversation.
Yes.
The problem being that for the last, 6-8 years now, the left talked about it anytime they wanted to.
Mm-hmm.
If anybody on the right said anything about politics, they were immediately beat down, screamed down, whatever you want to call it. So, we tend to not discuss politics a lot.
Yeah. Well, Brian's got a point. The problem is we may ignore politics, but it will not ignore us.
No.
Yeah.
And all politics are local. That's what people tend to forget.
Yeah.
It all starts at your local level.
Well, and I got a group that I'm in, a link was shared that was specific to one member of the group because it was local politics where she lives. And I went and read it just out of curiosity. And the fellow that wrote it is a retired physics professor.
Yeah.
And man has a way with words. I really enjoyed the article, even though I know virtually nothing about the small city that he was writing about. And what he had to say was very good points and pertinent to pretty much everywhere I've ever lived in the United States, and I have lived from coast to coast, which is that a lot of local council members get elected because they're part of the right group around town, not because they actually have an idea what they're doing.
Yep.
And as a result, things like he was talking about a construction project that involved, it needed permits from the railroad.
Yeah.
And evidently the permits were never requested. So all access to downtown, their main street, was basically shut down for what was supposed to be a couple of weeks of work. And then when the railroad came in and was like, you have to stop, you can't be undermining the railroad overpass, they were basically like, well, we don't know how to do that, so we're not going to. And now months later, downtown is dying.
Yeah.
And businesses are closing all over the place. And the council's like, well, there's nothing we can do.
Yeah.
So this professor is going off.
Yeah.
But that is a story that I think an awful lot of small town politics can be read in that kind of thing.
Oh, yeah.
And that's where we can get involved and actually make differences, which in theory has an effect all the way to the top.
The idiots get off scot-free. That's what usually happens.
Yeah. Yeah, they get the next election comes through, somebody else gets elected because obviously those dudes are incompetent, but nothing happens to them.
And people that are elected are not necessarily any more competent than the ones that just got
right
out.
Right, exactly.
Hey, Ted, good to see you. Parenthetically speaking, good to see you. But you're talking about politics getting into everything.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know how many of you follow or have heard of Hickok 45.
I just saw his little announcement YouTube thing.
I followed Hickok 45 and his son Gary for about 20 years.
Yeah, they've been doing it for 20 years, like 15 on YouTube.
Yeah.
Or since YouTube started almost.
Yeah. And it was a gun thing. It was a shooting thing. It was demonstrating weapons.
And always was from the beginning of the channel.
Yeah.
And now suddenly YouTube has a problem with that.
Yeah. But because they're sponsored by Bud's Gun Shop
and
they get free ammunition, they're considered a sponsored channel.
Yeah.
And because they're guns, they're evil, mean, and nasty. So basically, Hickok 45 is being kicked to the curb.
Yeah.
And the potential exists that they will lose all of their entire 15 plus years of YouTube videos.
Well, that's a thing where they can and should have those backed up elsewhere.
Yeah.
And if they don't already, hopefully they're working very hard at that right now. There are some other venues for this kind of thing. They don't have the monetization power yet.
Oh, Rumble does.
Rumble, well, I don't know that Rumble has the monetization power of YouTube. That's what I'm saying. But the other one is that the guys that do the Unsubscribed podcasts, so Brandon Herrera, Demolition Ranch, I forget who all, they've started a subscription-based video model. A gun friend. Well, it's called Pepperbox, which is a gun.
Yeah.
And that one I looked at and I'm like, it's not really my kind of content.
Yeah.
But the Unsubscribed podcast is hilarious, so I watch it, and I might go pick up a subscription over there just to support what they're doing.
Yeah.
So I would say that if they aren't already talking to Hickok 45, they definitely should be. Yeah, Fat Electrician is on there, and they have some interesting guests from time to time.
Oh, Rick.
So,
I can just see your dad with a professional experience in power utilities going against a PhD. I can tell who won that one in a big friggin' hurry. And it was your dad.
And that's the other thing, too, which is that...
Sir Brass, an injunction's not going to do any good against Google. alphabet. We know that.
No, I mean, really, what is going to work is two things. One, we have to get serious about the culture war, which Raconteur Press is one small actor in that, and I do my part.
Yeah.
And you do your part.
Yeah.
But two is to make it hurt in the pocketbook, which is to set up these other alternative things. I mean, this is part of why I went over to Substack. And as of a couple of days ago, I have now made more than $1,000 with Substack.
Yeah.
Which was never my point. But I offered the paid thing after being asked of, hey, I want to be able to tip you for your work, support you. And I was like, okay, sure. And I turned it on, and people pay me to do what I do.
I get $3.17 a month.
Yeah. And that's the
actually
thing.
Had two people pay.
And that's the thing, which is, it used to be that patrons of the arts were the rich and the powerful.
Yeah.
But now we're in a position where we have all of these
Options.
abilities to go out and do little trickles of income. Larry Correa is talking about, he was talking about doing Patreon, which I think is a bad idea for him, because Patreon has shut down people that were not in their political box.
Yeah.
So I think that avenues like Substack, which is fairly friendly to everybody, it seems like, from what I've seen, and you can do video, Rumble, where you can do video. Substack supports video and podcasts and text. I haven't really messed around with all of those.
Oh, damn. Bob Newhart died?
Oh.
What? When did that happen? I just saw Raptors comment.
Okay, so what Sir Brasswood Farm Girl is talking about is modern slang. I know what Riz means. It's from charismatic. It's the middle syllable thing. The rest of them, no clue. I would have to ask my child, and I'm not going to. Things I don't want to know.
Newhart was one of the good comedians.
Comedy is interesting. I wound up studying comedy extensively because of what I did in a past life, and learned that there were some comedians I liked and some I didn't, and eventually figured out kind of why. But comedy is when you say something and make someone laugh, there's a reason that they respond like that. And as a comedian, you have to really understand if you're going to do it well, which someone like Bob Newhart would have. If you're doing it really well, you understand why what you're going to say is going to make people laugh.
Well, and many of those learned from the vaudeville comedians.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, Don, whatever. Saffron Beetlebox has entered the chat. Yes. Linguistic drift, it happens. But humor, for many, many years, was physical humor. And then you got the records. They used to do humor records.
Oh, yeah. I had a couple of those when I was a kid.
Yeah. Red Fox.
Mm-hmm. Red
Skelton, Justin Wilson,
mm-hmm.
Jack Benny.
Yeah. Well, and I think there always was verbal humor and physical humor.
Yeah. Carol Burnett. Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, you can certainly see the arc from vaudeville into silent films. Buster Keaton, where they had because it was silent films, they lost the verbal and they went with the music.
Yeah.
And then when you got talkies and television, then you got back the verbal.
Yeah.
But there was also at that point that huge legacy of slapstick and physical.
Yeah.
Um,
Jerry Clower, Cosby.
yeah.
Carlin was really the first one that was what I would call the anti-comedy comedian, because he was the first one that really started throwing out the blue comedy.
I think it was pushing the edges.
Yeah.
I think a lot of comedians, that's what they do. They're looking for the edges. And
Yeah.
that's what I was talking about before, which is there's a lot of psychology in comedy.
Oh, yeah.
And you poking people in an uncomfortable place when you get them to laugh at a
Yeah.
lot of times. And what happens is if you're pushing the edges and pushing the edges, Jonathan Winters, can't remember the other fellow, he played somebody in Herbie the Love Car, but as a comedian, he was vulgar. Small round guy, I can't remember his name. Somebody will probably know. And Buddy Hackett, yes,
Buddy
thank
Hackett,
you.
Yeah.
But when I was studying comedy and my comedic tastes and the person I was studying with did not align at all. But you have different flavors of comedy too, because you had the British comedy that was very, very dry.
Yeah.
And then you had the American comedy tended much more towards, it went into the blue, the vulgar. And then you got things like the Blue Collar Comedy Tour that was a whole different level of comedy because it's out of a different culture.
Yeah.
And all of them are different cultures.
Exactly. And that's the point, is we could enjoy any of those or enjoy none of them. It was our choice.
Well, you could enjoy any of them if you understood enough about that culture to find it funny. Because someone that was a blue blood from the main line probably wasn't going to get the Blue Collar Comedy Tour enough to laugh at it.
Yeah.
And it's like Sanford and I were just talking yesterday about Jeff Dunham and Ahmed the Dead Terrorist. And, and how some of Jeff's bits fall flat for us. But he's still a brilliant comedian.
Robin Williams.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah.
Pure manic comedy.
Mm-hmm.
And not everybody liked him.
Not everybody liked him, that's for sure.
So when you're doing a live show that involves comedy, and I have done this, there is an energy. Oh, it is amazing. There is nothing else like hitting and having the entire room follow you into that joke and just explode with laughter. And I was mostly working with kids. I wasn't really working with adults. Kids are rough. But still, I sometimes miss that. I don't necessarily miss a lot of other things about what I used to do for a living, but I really miss that, having an audience just cascade into laughter.
Yeah. Well, and it's the fast response.
Mm-hmm. Oh, and you're playing off them.
You've got to be thinking on your feet. Yeah.
And you have to be absolutely aware of where they are and what they're feeling and thinking. And you are reading them and you are bouncing off their energy.
Yeah.
And it is this amazing push, pull, give and take. And a lot of people just don't.
Yeah. They don't understand. They can't do it.
You see an awkward comedian whose timing is off, and it's because they can't read the crowd.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or they're actually doing it on purpose.
Mm-hmm.
And there are comedians that will do that.
Yeah. I don't like cringe comedy. Never have.
Yeah.
I find embarrassment excruciating, and certainly public embarrassment. Just no.
Yeah. Ron White. Yeah.
Yeah. Somebody's alluding to Fluffy, great Gabriel Iglesias. He's funny. But
you get the same thing with storytelling.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not much of a comedian. I do tell a lot of jokes, most of them bad. But if one of the reasons why people have been telling me to write forever is because I can tell a decent story.
Yeah.
But a lot of that is you read the audience without even knowing what you're reading necessarily.
Mm-hmm.
If something is working better, you hit that area harder.
Yeah.
Well, and
Jimmy Carr is a good example of the darker side of humor. Mm-hmm. Yes.
Storytelling and writing are very different skill sets.
Yeah.
And you can do both Ian can do both. Kelly Grayson can do both. And there are others, I'm sure, but most writers, authors cannot get up in front of a crowd, read the crowd, and get the crowd to die laughing as they tell them the story. Um, and part of that is related to how they just can't do that in public, but
Yeah.
they can do that, and that's why they're a writer. And writing, you don't get that audience feedback.
Yeah.
Which is what can make it really difficult for most storytellers to bridge into writing, because you have a page in front of you and it's really awkward to,
It has no feedback. Yeah.
yeah, there's nothing there.
Yeah. Well, and part of mine comes from A, having been through instructor school, and B, years of standing up in front of people teaching.
Yeah.
And you do the same thing as a teacher. You have to interact with the students.
Yeah.
And it's always interesting because, oh, Don Rickles, God, yes.
Yeah.
He was the original insult comic.
And he could do it and make you laugh, even as he was doing what the kids call these days a sick burn.
Yeah.
That's all he did was sick burn.
Yeah.
I loved him.
Rodney Dangerfield did it by, basically.
That man had an elastic face.
Oh, he had an elastic face, but his humor was all about his failures. He didn't pick on anybody in the crowd. He picked on himself.
Yeah. Yeah.
And everybody identified with that. No respect. Yeah.
No respect.
We've all been there.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah. And it's funny because somebody up thread said that there aren't a lot of comedians these days. And I think that that's true, because in the current culture of political correctness,
comedy is not politically correct.
Comedy is absolutely not politically correct. And that's also why I think we're seeing several politicians in the forefront of supporting Trump and being outspokenly not politically correct. But it is also one of the things, which is that comedy is true at its core. And if you can't speak truth, then you can't throw the joke and have it stick.
Yeah.
And have it really land.
That's an excellent point, Brian. Comedy is built on pain.
And
yeah, because we either cry or we laugh.
Yeah.
So.
And you get a lot of the comedians that are still young enough they could be doing comedy.
Yeah.
Have quit because they can't do comedy. They have to do, they tell a joke about
anything.
Yeah. And somebody gets offended.
Yeah.
And they get shut out of the venue.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's something that, again, with
Bill Engvall. Yeah.
Yeah.
Here's your sign.
Right. Oh, I've had those moments both ways.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's the thing, which is that the threat of cancellation is one of those things that has to go away.
Yeah.
Oh no, puns are so painful, James. Yeah. Puns are pain. Oh. Well, and speaking of controversy and comedy, and I had told Jim I would bring this, and I will hand it to him for a second and show you guys the other props I have here. Which is, I picked up the book I just handed Jim in an antique mall because first of all, I collect folklores and fairy tales and such. And I knew that book was not something that you were going to be able to find new. And a lot of the copies of it are going to be memory hold. And that has been rebound into a library binding, which means that at some point it was read and used so much the original binding has fallen apart.
Yep.
And a library was checking it out often enough that they put in the time and effort to put a new binding on it. Um,
Oh, damn. This has got all of the stories.
it has all of the stories. I just handed him a collection of the Uncle Remus stories. And the thing is that reading through them, because I'd had some exposure to Uncle Remus before. I mean, I think we all are familiar with Brer Rabbit and Brer Fox. But you read through these stories, and yes, the dialect is considered offensive these days, which is crap.
Yeah.
I'm not going to be unladylike. But the stories themselves are clever. They are smart, they're witty, they're incisively cutting sometimes. And it's very transparent what some of the Uncle Remus stories were, which is that they are telling people experiences through the lens of the critters. And so it's very human, at the same time that it can masquerade as children's stories. There are also some stories in there that you read, and you, if you understand what's going on, that um, that is the undercurrent, the culture that's there. Um, they're really intelligent and cleverly done, and the fact that they are no longer considered politically correct is almost racist in itself, because they are a glimpse into a culture that was surviving and creating its own folk tales, having been severed from their original ones.
Yep.
And so they were retelling and recreating um, the foundational storytelling, and it's I mean, it's a lovely thing to read. I can't I was talking to Sanford. I was doing recording read alouds on YouTube. I can't do the accent. It's I was raised in a different place,
Yeah.
and I've heard the accent, so I know what it should sound like, and I can't do it. My speech training is wrong.
Yeah. Here's
Yes.
an example.
Yes.
This is the start of the Creatures Go to the Barbecue. Once upon a time, Uncle Remus said to the little boy. But when was once upon a time? The child interrupted to ask. The old man smiled. I expect 'twas one or two times, or maybe a time and a half. You know when Johnny Ashcake got the break? Well, 'twas long in them days. Once upon a time, he resumed, this man had a garden so fine that all the neighbors come to see it. Some would look over the fence, some would peep through the crack, some of them would come over and look at by the light of the stars. And one of them was old Brer Rabbit. Starlight, moonlight, cloudlight, the night was light for him. But when the turn of the morning come, he had always up and about, and he feeling pretty well, I think you saw. Now, then you done heard what I had to say. There was Mr. Man, yonder was the garden, here's old Brother Rabbit. Uncle Remus made a map of this part of the story by marking the sand with his walking cane. Will this be the case? When you expect want to happen? Nothing in the round world, but what been happening since greens and fatter grass was planted in the ground. They look fine and they taste fine as long. That's the accent.
Mm-hmm.
Brother Remus was portrayed in the book by Richard Chase as an old black man, because in the South, most of the storytellers historically were the old blacks. They were the ones that had the memories. And that actually goes back to Africa and to the stories, the oral histories.
Yeah.
That's where people tend to lose things like that. They forget about it. Yeah.
One of the illustrations. They were the wise ones.
Yeah.
They were the elders.
Yep.
And the little children would gather around them and they would tell them stories. And in those stories were lessons that they needed to learn.
Yeah.
And I don't know how
And that
much.
was the way of teaching.
Mm-hmm.
Because every one of those stories taught you a lesson.
Yes.
Without teaching,
Yeah.
without preaching.
Because humans, we are storytelling creatures.
Yep. Remus accent sounded like much all the folks in Southern Louisiana. As a matter of fact, Arcade, that same goes true for Mississippi, Alabama, Georgia.
Eastern Kentucky, Eastern Tennessee.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes, our myths do define us.
Mm-hmm.
And the problem was that being able to read those stories and enjoy those stories, I grew up with them.
Mm-hmm.
I'm 72 years old.
Yep.
So I grew up with them in a time when it was perfectly correct. And I've had black babysitters, I've had Creole babysitters, I've had Hispanic babysitters. They were known as mothers of the kids I was running around with because we were free range kids at age 5 and 6.
Mm-hmm.
And when you live in the South, in the deep South, your house is not next door. Next door may be a mile down the road.
You didn't like that kid, so you're 2 miles down the road to the next kid's house.
Yeah.
And this edition of the book is from 1955.
Yeah.
And the library that it was in, because it says it's been stamped that it was properly withdrawn from Wichita Falls Public Schools.
Yeah.
So this was originally a school library book.
Yeah.
And it's a lovely old book, and it's been rebound in a library binding. But there's a reason that I have been buying the old books, because I have discovered when I was doing the read alouds, one of the things I was doing was I did the Just So stories.
Yeah.
And the Project Gutenberg, the online free edition of Just So stories, is missing.
Yeah.
One of the stories that I happen to have a 1920 edition
of course it is.
Kipling, and so it's not in there.
Yeah.
But it's like, this was one of my favorites growing up, is Two Little Savages by Ernest Thompson Seton. And it is a tutorial for two little boys that wanted to live out in the woods and be little Indians. They wanted to play Indians, but they wanted to do more than play.
Yeah.
So it is them learning from various people and through experience how to hunt and track and build a teepee or build a fire and
pick up arrows that would actually work.
Right. And it's got these wonderful little illustrations, and some of them are this is not just an illustration. This is a how to recognize all your duck species for duck
how to
hunting.
recognize which ones you can shoot, which ones are good to eat, which ones you don't want.
So those are and Seton was a naturalist.
Yeah.
So his observations are very much based in what he saw. And that was, for a long time, this kind of book was available to little boys and girls.
Yeah.
Never having been a little boy, to grow up with and learn
I would
from.
hope not.
Well, I'd be mighty surprised if you had that.
I had
and we got color on it, Cedar.
But as I was heading out of the house today, I was grabbing a couple of books, and this is another one of the Big Red series of books.
Yeah.
Which again is talking about young men hunting and fishing and trapping.
Yeah.
And then that was a much more girly thing.
Yeah.
But again, it portrays a world that we no longer live in.
Yeah.
Because nurses don't look like that anymore.
No.
And nurses aren't trained like that anymore.
No.
Reading these, I had an entirely different expectation of what nurse training would be like, which is part of why when I signed up to become a nurse, got about a year into the program and had hit a hitch.
Yeah.
I had no qualms about switching away from it because nurses are not that anymore.
Yeah.
But collecting the old books is exactly, this is me kind of being like, I will make sure that the survive.
And you're exactly right, Brennan. Lose the book, lose the history, lose yourself.
Yeah. And that goes into the culture war that I
Yeah.
alluded to earlier.
Yeah.
That whether we like it or not, we're in it.
The people that think that all food comes from a grocery store, they do not understand food production.
Yeah.
Well, they make the meat at the grocery store. It's easy to see how it's produced.
Yeah, right. Yeah. We've seen those people, yes.
Yeah. Well, I was watching so I do the long YouTube cues and just let it run while I'm working.
Yeah.
Because it keeps me from dying of terminal boredom. But there was one that popped up into the queue of this young lady was saying that they were quitting homesteading. And they weren't really homesteading. They had a small suburban, I mean, I think they maybe had an acre. But basically they got to the point where they had chickens die and she was supposed to butcher chickens and she couldn't bring herself to do it. And so they decided that it was too hard and they were quitting.
Yeah. Oh, Richard, I've got one better than that. One that I saw here in Itchy Paw Falls. A guy in a Mercedes, preppy type Mercedes SUV, had the polo shirt, had the starched khaki shorts, had the boat shoes, pulled into the United gas aisle next to the air pump, calling AAA to come put air in his tires.
Huh?
This is a 30-something-year-old guy. Did not have a freaking clue.
He may never have had to put air in his tires.
And I watched it, and I started to go over and help him, and then I went, no,
that never ends well.
So I just finished filling up my truck with gas, and I left.
Mm-hmm.
There is no competence.
Well,
And we've wasted another hour plus of your time, folks. Jeez.
Next time we should talk about why there is hope for humanity. Because there is.
Yeah.
There is?
Yes.
Are you sure?
Yes, I am sure. I have met some of these kids out there. I get to spend time with some young sailors, and yeah, they're young and they're green and they're wet behind the ears. Yeah. But they're going to grow up into fine young men, and they are hope.
Okay, next Thursday.
Have hope.
Yes, but their women aren't growing up to be fine young women.
No comment.
With the black pill. All right. You can hang up. I'm going to go.
All right. Remember, folks, don't sweat the petty stuff. Don't pet the sweaty stuff. We'll see you later. And thanks for putting up with us today, as always. Bye-bye.